Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Seth Green, and I'm the founding director of the Baumhart Center at Loyola, and it is a thrill to be a part of From Day One. We have a spectacular panel on what I believe, and this is with great respect to the other sessions of the day, is the most important section of the day. And the reason is that the number one pain point in business today is recruiting and retaining the top talent. And the number one reason people come to work is because of the purpose that they connect to their workplace. And the way that you build that, and Chris did a fabulous job of raising the core questions at stake, is you set values, you follow through on them, and you bring that purpose into that workplace. And the amazing thing that's happened over the last decade, as this has become a bigger and bigger field, is that companies across all industries have found a way to set great values and follow through on them and make their companies the place to be. I think of the Unilevers of the world that make the soap unit the most exciting unit to be in because they have a value around hygiene for the world. And I think of the most attractive companies in the world that can't at least communicate their value attainment, the Facebooks that are under threat, and the way that they lose talent no matter how incredibly sexy tech and being at the forefront of this whole new field is, because people don't feel that connection to following through on values. So this is ultimately the epicenter of how we do good and do well, because it's where you can bring those values together that you can get both and. So we have a fabulous group to talk about this with. I'm going to introduce them one by one as we ask this first question. We're going to start with Teri Arvesu, who is at Univision. And I want you, Teri, to tell us just a brief snapshot of your values at Univision and give us one or two examples of how you live them.
Sure. I think Univision as a media company is really extraordinary, very different also from even our English language competition. And the reason being is that we were created first with a purpose, and then it ended up being a company, right? We also started local. The first television station was created in San Antonio, later acquired one in LA, and then ones in Miami and Chicago, and with one unique purpose, which is to inform, entertain, and to empower the Latino population in this country. So I think that's deep set into everything that we do. And because so many, we have a lot of diversity, but we have a lot of employees who grew up watching Univision. And there is this sense of home, right? I think of Univision sometimes as the place that, my grandmother probably after a hard day, we're of Cuban descent, and they came in the 60s, and when Univision came along, it's probably the place they came home to and received kind of a hug. It was like home, right? Like they didn't have to worry that they didn't know how to get around or speak the language. This was like, ooh, our people, we get this. So there's that. And a driving force within the news department, which is what I oversee, is we have 4 pillars, which is education. If you really want to empower a community, educate them, have them understand financial literacy, keep them healthy, and have them participate civically. And so that is involved in even our editorial meetings within the morning, in every decision that we make.
Thank you, Teri. Howard, you're the CEO of Good 360. Tell us how you see these issues.
So Good 360 is a product philanthropy company, and in a sentence, we work with 400 companies and help them manage their excess inventories and distribute and redistribute that inventory to over 80,000 nonprofits that are serving communities that need that inventory. And because we're a nonprofit, you would think that the values are kind of how we start the day and how we end the day, every day. Everybody walks in with a mission, and our mission is to really transform lives of people that are in need and give them a renewed sense of hope by virtue of what we support them with in product donations. That said, and we do it around the world. So in Liberia, as an example, we're rebuilding the Liberia school system in a collaboration with the government as well as some private sector companies and other NGOs. And we're providing everything from building supplies to school supplies to uniforms for the kids, right? So we're a smart supply chain that allows for good things to happen without spending money on product. They can spend money on services. But in a nonprofit, you would think that because we do start the day each and every day as a mission-based organization, it would be easy. One of the tension points is this tension point about how do you get scalability. We're about to round our $10 billion mark in products redistributed. And so there's a business aspect to running the nonprofit, right? And you've got a lot of mission-based people who naturally gravitate to an organization like ours. And helping them understand the importance and the value of having a social entrepreneurship mindset, and that money isn't actually bad, it's empowering. So the way we reinforce that is through transparency. We always are having conversations about how we're impacting lives, but we're also having conversations about what do we need to do operationally in order to impact more lives year over year. So there's just a tremendous amount of communications, a tremendous amount of transparency.
Thank you, Howard. Jenna Daugherty is the Divisional VP for Social Responsibility at Abbott. Tell us what these values look like there.
Sure. Abbott is a 130-year-old global healthcare company. We have the majority of our business is actually in medical devices and diagnostics. And our purpose is really to help people live better, healthier, more full lives. And so we have a very strong purpose, but we have 4 key values. And so those values are pioneering, achieving, caring, and enduring. And we do try to insert the values into everyday processes and actions of our people. One of the ways in my organization that we do that is when we are running global programs around the world, that value of enduring really matters to us. And what that means to us is that what we're doing around the world is sustainable. That when we go in and we do something, that we're not leaving an empty hole. That we stay there and we support, and that we make sure that we're making a sustainable, enduring impact.
Thank you, Jenna. We're going to come to Bob Dixon, who is at Siemens. Tell us about your work there.
Thank you, Seth. It's really great to be here. This is the fun part of the job, by the way. All the other stuff is work. I'm with Siemens, and those that don't know, I'm going to give you a couple of facts because it helps me frame what our challenges are in this space. We're 172 years old. We operate in 170 countries. We have 370,000 employees.
Wow.
And we do 39 patents a day. We're about a $100 billion a year company. And you imagine over time how at different points in a company's life, different things become important. And certainly you go through good times and bad times, and out of that hones what you get to do. So we have 3 basic sort of high-level value propositions. Responsible business, doing business the right way. The environment, that's my personal passion, is the environment. And people and society, and that's all part of a much broader business to society strategy that we have. We look at it and say, yes, we're in business, but we're really meant to make society better, and how do we work together? And as I think through all of those, you imagine a company like ours, all those countries, all those divisions, cultural, language, how do we bring some of these things together? And a couple, 3 or 4 years back, we made sort of, I think, a transformative change in one very simple thing. We all have goals, right? Targets, call them what you want. And most in our history, it's always been what? What'd you do? Sold this much time, this profit stuff. Ours has 2 dimensions. We still got the what, that's got to be there, but it's the how. And it's the how, when you look inside of it, it says ethical, courageous, bold, working well with people, and that has equal weight in our system of how you're viewed in your job. And I think that's one of the ways across all those funny divisional lines and country lines we have is a common thing. It's not the what, it's the what and the how. And the how is how we tie that back to culture.
Thank you, Bob. And our final answer on this one, Andrea Wood, who is the head of social impact at Best Buy.
Great. Well, I have to give our CEO a lot of credit because he really sets the tone that trickles down to every part of the organization. And whenever Hubert speaks, he says the purpose of a company is not to make money. The purpose of a company is to contribute to the common good. And he talks about that in everything that we do. And so, luckily for me, as being part of social impact, I have a lot of support from him and from our executives for the work that we're doing to help teens from underserved communities prepare for tech jobs. But I also think that you'll see it in if you've been into a Best Buy store lately, you will see this come out we have a rallying cry, which is, let's talk about what's possible, and then the behaviors that go with it, which are be human, think about tomorrow, and make it real. And so, as an example, when you go into a store and you're a customer and you say, I want to buy a printer, and then you say, the employee will ask you, what do you want to do with the printer, and get some information about how you're going to use that printer. Likely, they're not going to sell you the most expensive printer. They're going to sell you the printer that is going to meet your needs. And so that's really about living the values of, what are we trying to do? We're trying to be human. We're trying to be real. And we're trying to, treat you the way that we want to be treated. And then one other thing I'll say is really about our purpose. And so when we think our purpose is actually to enrich lives through technology. It's not about selling stuff. It's not about, trying to push stuff on you, but how can we help you live a better life through the technology that you purchase?
So I alluded to this earlier, and I want to give some data behind it and then ask you a question. There has never been a more important moment for business to live its values and to be trusted by its employees. So there's a barometer that's actually done by Edelman, which has a big office here in Chicago, called the Trust Barometer. And since 2001, they've looked at this question of who do you trust for information? And this year, it came back that by far the most trusted source of information, partly due to chaos that's occurring in some ways in information in the United States, is my employer. 74% of people said that's the most trusted source when they had multiple options, including the media, including NGOs, including other options. So that is a blessing and a burden, because now you really need to ensure you're living your values. Your employees have never been more focused on where you might not be. Social media has never been easier as a way to expose that. And so with that kind of prologue, I want to hear from you. How do you ensure you stay true to your values? What's the role of the leader? And then what's the role of protocol and processes? And we're going to now move to the kind of popcorn style where we'll see who pops first and go through the panel.
I'll go first.
All right, Teri, go for it.
Only because I was so excited when I saw the barometer. It mentioned local in it. There's I think, what was it, 10 or 12 things that you could, most important things that came out of that study. First of all, they mentioned news, so I was like, yes. So they mentioned local, I was like, yes. And then on the part about where they talk about employees who trust their employer and how deeply invested they are and engaged, I was like the picture of our team, right? People who are completely invested in the mission and the purpose behind what we do, especially at a time where, so I wonder if Latinos would have responded a little different, because I gotta say that based on our ratings, you would think that not their employers, but Univision is their number one trusted source. No, I'm serious, okay? I just gotta applaud us there, but it's true. I mean, what most people don't know, that even in the Chicago market, regardless of language, we beat NBC, we beat CBS, we beat Fox, GN. I mean, people are watching our air, and it's because they trust us. And the sense of, I think we talked a little bit about anecdotally. I will tell you that there was, I don't want to oversimplify our audience because there's a lot of dimensions to Latinos, right? From class to socioeconomic to race to nationality. But one of the stories that most struck me in terms of purpose was when I was doing some stories on human trafficking in Miami, and one of the women who was a social worker and had worked with one of the women that was rescued says she learned to dial 911 because she watched Univision. So to me, that was like, well, wait a second, this goes further than even just a purpose. It's like a lifeline for people. So I like to say that we're in a position that most other people are not, and with our audience, and it's because I think they've seen that consistency in our values, in that they call our assignment desk sometimes before they call 911. Right? Fire, house on fire. You need to call the rescue first? I mean, call 911 first, then call me back, okay? You know? And that's something we in news do not take lightly.
Yeah.
And it is very representative of our brand.
Well, and just to affirm this with data, what the study shows is that people trust who is most proximate to them. And I think for a lot of people, especially with language and other reasons, they have that proximity. And so that's a major connection, even though they may not feel it to other media sources.
Yeah, Seth, maybe just to underscore a couple of things that you've said. So you started out and you talked about the importance of talent in our organizations, and I'm sure we're all feeling, the early effects of a real turnover in the workforce. And we all know, I'm sure, that for this new workforce, it's really important that companies have strong values and that they enable their employees to be connected, the individual purpose to the organizational purpose. And I think that was one of the things that came out of the Trust Barometer this year, and I would highly encourage everyone to look at a 2-minute spot from David Edelman on trust at work, and it gives 4 kind of key areas. But one of those areas is employee engagement. And so finding ways to allow your employees to connect both their personal values and the organizational values is going to be incredibly important moving forward.
Seth, I was thinking the whole trust thing, and like any big company, we have our town halls, we have this, we have that, a lot of transparency. But trust is a two-way street,
Yeah.
right? And you imagine a big German company, 172 years old, you can't imagine how many rules, regulations. Oh my God, you spent $3, where's the receipt on that? About a year and a half ago, we said, going to take that away. We trust you. Just put in the expense if you really did it, That was actually so small, but it felt so profound to a lot of people. It's like, well, they trust me, and I trust them. And it starts building mutual trust.
Yeah.
And so a lot of time, I think we say, well, we want our employees to trust in us, but we don't really trust in them. And so that's what I would encourage people to do, is figure out how to trust your employees. Allow them to talk, use the social media, do all the things you're supposed to do. But do the little things, too, because little things, they connect. Oh, hey, Alex works for me. No, just, Alex, you make the decision. I'm okay with that. I trust your judgment. It takes you a long ways. It really does. It's a two-way street.
Well, talking about doing well and doing good, you probably got back several 100,000 hours of productivity.
Oh, my
in that move as well.
Yeah. And it would sound like we're bragging. We at this point in our company's life, we score pretty high on a lot of things. I see it from the inside, and there's so much more to do, right? Yeah. It isn't so much, do I score good against GE or Eaton or this or this? You really got to benchmark yourself, against, yourself. I can do more. I mean, I'm a sustainability guy, so I always ask people, anybody get up today, decide you want to dirty some water, mess up some air, fill the land? Everybody says, yeah. I said, but it's the wrong question. The real question is, do you wake up today and say, can I do better? And internally, that's what we try to do. We do things like sustainability moments and safety moments, and certainly every meeting has, hey, here's how you do business right, so it's a little ethics moment. You just got to keep reinforcing that, reinforce, and do the little things. Moves the needle.
Howard?
Yeah, I would say that building trust with your employees and your stakeholders is one of the hardest things that any one of us has to do. But it's not as hard as winning back trust if you've lost it,
for sure.
Right? And my organization is an organization where our foundation, it has to be based on trust, right? So I'm working with Amazon, Walmart, CVS, the biggest companies in the world who are trusting our organization to redistribute valuable goods in a conscientious, efficient way that supports the objectives of that donation. I'm also being trusted by my nonprofits to make sure I'm getting them, and I'm a supply chain of goods that they need each and every day. It might be a nonprofit that's working with foster kids or battered women or disaster, and they have these critical needs, and they look to us to make sure that they can source what they need to do what they do. And then I've got my employees, right? And my employees have got to trust us. I make no mistake about it, and I have some associates here. I walk in every day, and I know how I act in that organization that day is I'm being tested every day in terms of my decisions, my behaviors, my attitude. I lose on attitude sometimes, by the way. That's my weak spot. But, we often have to make decisions that are decisions that in some ways actually work against the organization in the short term, but on behalf of our stakeholders on the long term, and we've got to accept that. So you get a chance each and every day, particularly when you're leading an organization, to increase the level of trust that you imbue in an organization. But man, if I trip, and nobody's perfect, it is so hard to get it back. So to me, when you're running an organization where the basis of what you do is based on trusted relationships with your external and internal stakeholders, if you don't lead from the top each and every day, if you don't understand that each day is another opportunity to do it right, and on lots of days that's not so hard, and on other days it is super hard. Because you're faced with complex decisions. So I think the trust issue is huge. I think one of the reasons why we see in Edelman the erosion of trust is because so many organizations, people, individuals make decisions, are afraid to make the decisions that could compromise in the short term what their specific objectives are as an individual or as a company or as a leader. But so the wrong decision is made, and I think Mike talked about that in terms of Siemens. You've got to be brave enough to make the hard decisions, even when they work against you, if making a different decision is going to erode trust to the people that you count on each and every day.
Andrea?
Yeah, and I'll just say one more thing. I think it's really more about how we lead. About a year and a half ago, our new head of HR at Best Buy very publicly talked about her journey and struggling with depression, and told a story about how she had gotten to a point in her life where she was completely hopeless and didn't really know if she could go on. And she told it in a town hall, and then she talked about it in various meetings and was very public about it. And that actually sparked a whole discussion about our leaders and how we need to be more vulnerable with our team. So when we talk about trust, thinking about being able to talk about the times when we've struggled or the times that we failed builds more trust than anything else, and that now our leaders are really modeling that at Best Buy to be able to talk about, hey, I wasn't always like this, right? There's a lot of stuff that has gone down, and let me tell you about my failures, and it really has helped, I think, create a culture of being more vulnerable.
Well, so I want to move to how we make the case for values in our businesses or in our organizations. I imagine we have an audience out there that is very encouraged and excited to see values at work and being followed through. But a lot of them are going to go back to executives, and the question will be, what's the business case? How does this commitment to values and an investment in it, how does that lead us to a higher performing company? Where can we see that? Are there metrics that we can point to? And I'm curious, I know those are questions that you get from your teams as well. What's the business case? How do you define it? And how do you share it upward, downward, across the organization to make clear why this investment is so important? We'll start with you, Teri, and then I think Jenna, it looks like she's ready too.
Go ahead. Do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. I was just going to say, in my team, we actually carved out a space for this, and we refer to it as shared value, and it's a space where we partner with our businesses, and we try to come up with a win-win situation where there's a business win, and there's also a societal, or it could be an environmental win. And an example of this is, right now, we are working on decentralized healthcare in Africa. And one of the things we're looking at is, well, if we can actually deliver diagnostics in local community levels, what is the cost savings to the overall system? How can we get access closer to people who live in very rural, hard to reach, low income parts of the world? And if we can actually raise the standard of care that they have access to and be able to sell product at the same time, that is a win-win, and there's an incredible business case for that. You can also look at that, I love that you talk about supply chain, Howard, because you can look at that across your supply chain. Especially for large multinational companies, we have a lot of different suppliers around the world. And just by offering training, you can come up with efficiencies in your supply chain, you can expand your supply chain, and you can really make an impact on people's lives.
Thank you. Teri?
So one example I think is definitely Tom's Shoes is one that started. He wanted to fix a social problem, which was to give shoes back to children, or I think it started with children, or people who didn't have shoes in other parts of the country. And I think they ended up selling, at one point it was valued at like some $1 billion, whatever. Anyways, that's one. The other one that we're beginning to toy a lot with, like obviously there's a lot of disruption in media, is that intersection between, for example, content, community, and revenue, right? We clearly have goals that we have to hit, but in the process of that, we can put out some great content, and we can also do some good in the community. And I'll give you an example that worked for us in December. You know, back in the day, you used to go to a television station, and you'd be like, hey, can you give me like $40,000 so that we could just, you know, give it all away, right? Or just do some marketing thing. Well, you know, that's not our reality anymore. And so a foundation came to us, said they were going to go into the inner city, and they were going to throw a Christmas party for kids in a school. And they gave them gifts. The parents, I mean, this is definitely a poor community. The parents were invited. The moms were being given makeovers. The teachers. I mean, again, it was a really special day, right? And so from the content side, I thought, that's great content. On the side of community, well, that makes even more sense. But when we went to the sales department and talked to them, we're like, is there a client partner that feels very like it would be a natural fit to stand there with them, where they get to kind of, you know, amplify some of what their values are and align them with ours. You know, I remember we said, it has to be the right client, right? It just can't be just anybody. And so we were able to bring in a client. They stood there with us. We changed the lives of a community. And so we hit the three things. And so when you talk about all the stakeholders being able to win, I think there's a lot of that trust can come as a result of finding that intersection without pretending that we're being, you know, way too, you know, disconnected from reality, right? There are goals. So there's your business case, right? Is serve the community, put out great content, and on top of that, hit your revenue goals. I mean, it's win-win-win.
Yeah, Bob, I think you have something. And you're reporting to the, you know, German headquarters, so it feels like you.
There are layers in between, but you know, not everything has to have an ROI.
Right.
You think of compliance and ethics. You spend a lot of money to do it, and do you make any money off it? No. You might have some cost avoidance. You know, you don't impact your brand. Can you measure brand value by doing something? Does it help you hire people? I think there's some things you do just because it's the right thing to do. And my test of ethics I learned early on is not held by not by everybody. Mine's pretty simple. Can I go home and tell my wife and my kids, you'd be proud of what I did today? If I can't do that, then from an ethics standpoint, for me, that's wrong. That may not work for other people. But this ROI, I coined a term ROI plus. What's the plus? Impact to society, sustainability, employee retention, hiring, brand. You can't put numbers around those. It's easy to get an ROI in. Numerator, denominator, do that little fancy MBA division. Oh, is it better than 3? Great, we do it. It's nonsense in some of that stuff. Some of this stuff is basic because you do it because it's part of your values. And I think when we start having to go back and make a business case for something that I think is a value-based, culturally based thing, I think we've got a problem. I think, frankly, it's a problem probably with your leadership. You have to go back and say, well, here is the return on this investment if we do the right thing because this is how it impacts society.
Well, just to show how this works, how many people, having heard that, would be more interested if you had the right technical expertise in working at Siemens? How many people in the audience feel like hearing that kind of value statement? And so one thing in the field...
The 370,000 scared them off. So.
Well, one thing happening in the field of academia is a move within this sphere to a VOI, value of investment. And the idea is,
that, by the way.
How can you put some other metrics out that you can also measure? Metrics like, at a party, do you jump at the opportunity to tell people where you work because you're so proud of your company? And that is priceless. And it really does advance a value that makes a more sustainable, enduring, and ultimately, impactful company.
I'm not going to say this stuff is easy. For example, sustainability, the area I work in, and, we publish that in our annual report. This is what we committed to, this is our footprint and stuff. And when you decide to do that, that becomes instantly auditable, right? And that takes some courage. We didn't do that overnight, right? You sort of got to get your ducks in a row and make sure you're all on board. Those are the sorts of things. If you need the courage to put these sorts of things front and center. Here's how we're doing on human rights. This is what we're doing for our local society. This is how we believe in STEM education. This is what we're doing in sustainability. And most of those things, frankly, you can't, I like the VOI versus the ROI, but I like my ROI plus too. So.
Howard.
Yeah, so I think there's no doubt, and throughout this conference, we've heard a lot of people talk about the shift that we're seeing in terms of the expectation of doing the right thing, and I think Siemens is a great articulation of that. In the nonprofit world, and I come out of the commercial world in a public company and had that pressure every quarter. One of the things I will never forget my first board meeting at Good 360, and my board was comprised of, you can look them up, but arguably some industry giants across the private sector, and we are a philanthropic organization, but the very first thing I said to them is, I think we can reinvent the philanthropic model, and they said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, I think we have to rethink what the philanthropic model is based on, because it's largely based historically on the idea of altruism. And, I would guess, because you're all here, that there's probably not a person in this room that doesn't have an altruistic orientation. But to me, the key to scaling the organization was to move from a purely altruistic organization to a mutualistic organization. And so we talk about mutualism, which isn't a word, by the way. But
It is now. It is now.
Yeah, we're at a university. It is now. That's
There
what
you
we
go.
do
It
in
is
academia.
now.
Pet words, right?
We like to create categories, right? But the idea of mutualism is all about how do you create value across all of your stakeholder groups. So we're working with companies, Best Buy being one of them, and working with them to help solve a challenge, but we're also asking them to donate product to us so we can donate product to others. And I will tell you, Amazon's one of our largest and most important partners, as is Walmart, CVS, and so many others. But if I ask Jeff Bezos to just give me $1 billion worth of product because it's the right thing to do, my guess is I'm not going to get it, right? So I do have to build a business case. And my business case is a combination of goodness and commerce, right? The cost of maintaining excess inventories is huge. The cost of remarketing product often exceeds the value of the remarketing of that product. The cost of disposal of that product is huge, both in terms of dollars and reputational risk, right? So we talk to our partners with a business sensibility, quite frankly, to help them do the right thing. And where it gets interesting is when you have a base case like that, and then there's a big event. Jim, who's sitting in the audience, and I were in Puerto Rico working with groups that were responding to Hurricane Maria, which happened now over a year ago. And it's amazing. The organizations that we work with day in, day out step up to the plate to do the right thing. They go above and beyond what they need to do from a business case point of view to do the right things, and they feel great about it. And we give them opportunities to be involved with that, and we give employees an opportunity to come experience and see what that looks like on the ground. But I do think that there is something in this idea of, particularly in the philanthropic world that I now live in, moving from altruism to mutualism and building a business case on the basis of where are those benefits, both hard benefits, financial benefits, and soft benefits.
And since Best Buy came up, Andrea, do you have any comments on how you see the business case for this?
I mean, absolutely. We're actually using, we have one of our programs are the Best Buy Teen Tech Centers. We have one here in Chicago if anybody wants to go see it. It's at the Little Black Pearl School. But we're looking at those not just to, to help teens from underserved neighborhoods get access to tech and tech education, but that's a talent pipeline for us and for our partners, So, why aren't we thinking about helping those teens, and the teens need jobs, and we have jobs. So why aren't we figuring that out? And also our partners, we're an ecosystem. Google and Samsung and Sony and Facebook and all of our partners have jobs too. And so that's the business case for us. And I think you're exactly right that it is mutualism, but I think that's what makes sense, right?
Yep.
Because that's where you have the greatest impact. It's not cutting a check, giving somebody a grant,
Right.
but how do we work with you for the greatest impact?
100%.
Yeah.
Well, so I have one final question. We may not get to everyone on this, but I want to just begin it, and then we can kind of continue the conversations over cocktails or other things later today. So a big question is, how do you evolve in your values? Because, part of the game here is you got to stay true to values, but obviously part of the game here is you've got to really embrace, the newest understanding of those ideals. And maybe we'll just start concentrated here because, we've got a 130-year-old company, we've got a 170-year-old company, and then we'll open it up. But yeah, how do you evolve in values over time in the best way to stay true and modernize simultaneously?
I was going to kick it to you first.
That's a really good question, Jenna. I'd be glad to answer it. But I say there are a couple things. One point, externalities affect you, right? That will force you to change. It certainly did our business. I think our customers. I think the expectations of, today's business, markets and people coming into our helps shift those values, right? Just because you have a corner office and a big fancy desk, it doesn't mean you're really probably as closely in touch as you might want to be of those changing values. So I think that is part of it. But I think, like you said, if I go back and look at things, we've always sort of stood for the same things. I think we've verbalized it different. We've certainly modernized our language, but we've added some things. You go back 25 years ago, I don't think climate was really part of the discussion. It is absolutely. We've always talked about employees. We've always talked about doing business the right way, though we had some stumbles along the way. But I think it's those sorts of things. I don't think there's a singular thing. I think it's sort of a maturing and evolution, and frankly, a lot of it comes from all the corner offices, right? It's who are those people. The golden rule. Those who have the gold make the rules, right? All those folks that sit up there, that what are their personal values? And of course, as your leadership goes through, I mean, the leadership we have now wasn't the leadership in the 40s. They grew up with a different set of values, and I think it's the maturing of those leaders also that bring that fundamental change. But I think it's got to be built into your system. Where if you don't go back and test those values every couple of years or constantly reinforce it, then it's going to get by you. So you have to have it be. Really in your DNA, I would say. In your DNA, your corporate DNA, to keep visiting those things.
Well, this has been an extraordinary panel, and I'll just close by saying that every trend line that we see is that this is going to be even more important as we look to the future. And one real excitement for us at our business school, a month ago, we launched a new MBA exclusively for future business leaders who want to marry profit and purpose. And as I heard each of you talk about win-win-wins, as I heard about mutualism, we're thinking about how can these people go out into the nonprofit sector and bring the business strategy. And then as I heard you both talk about how can we actually locate this value set at the core of our business. It's so exciting to imagine what a future generation that is literally from the beginning thinking about how do we put these two goals together and always solve for that simultaneity. To build enduring businesses. We really do have a bright opportunity, and if you look at the most intractable issues from climate to poverty, business is not only a preferred but an essential part of the solution. So can we give them a huge round of applause? And thank you all for being part of this conversation.